Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So this is the last parts of the interview of Luang Por Sumedho with Roger Wheeler, who was an American ordained in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And this interview took place at Insight Meditation Society in May of 1981. And there's been a number of discussions about skillful use of religious form and tradition and the practice of the Vinaya. And then the last part of this this section, which is part 5, then Roger goes on to ask about the the relationship to the precepts and how they might become a neurotic discipline. So Luang Por has begun in this section by comparing learning the discipline to practicing on a piano, so that you learn over many hours, doing your scales and training the hands, fingers where to go to make the notes, and then that's how you develop the skills, so that once you've really learnt all the rules and the procedures and practices, then it becomes something that's automatic. You can use those without needing to think about it. So then Luang Por carries on in his explanation about the Vinaya training. Many people criticize the rules concerning women. Why can't monks touch women? Quote unquote. Why can't monks be alone in a room with a woman? Why can't I have a woman up here and talk to her alone in a private interview? What is it about women? Was the Buddha a male chauvinist pig? Questions like this often come up. It's a matter of establishing a proper relationship so that the Dhamma can be taught. So also the Insight Meditation Society was a Buddhist retreat center, but the majority of teachers there were lay teachers. They would have had, I think Ajahn Chah had taught there in 1979. They would have had teachers like Mahasi Sayadaw, U Pandita also teaching there in the past. But the structure of, say, the monastic rules and the adherence to those, say, particularly for having an interview with a woman retreatant via the teaching Ajahn or the Sayadaw would always have to have another monk or a male person sitting in to be accompanying. These are the kind of questions that were coming up, and also why physical contact between the monks who were visiting and lay women also was forbidden. They couldn't shake hands or anything of that nature. Questions like this often come up. It's a matter of establishing a proper relationship so that the Dhamma can be taught. Many people have forgotten how nature works. The female attracts the male, and vice versa. It's a natural condition. Also, if I have a woman in my room, even though I think I don't have a problem with lust anymore, unquote, quote unquote, how would that look to others? If Bhikkhu Sujito saw a woman walking out of my room, well, it would look bad. These are the ways of protecting women, of keeping their reputation from being gossiped about. Moreover, women often fall in love with teachers and figures of authority. Women have tremendous power to draw monks who are still very attracted to women, especially if the women are discussing their own personal problems. One can easily get emotionally caught up in that. So these are very important considerations in terms of our Vinaya discipline, and this is something that's unusual to us as Westerners coming into this training and practice. But as you live with it, and it's similar for the nuns community. If a male wants to talk to one of the senior nuns, and they should have a female companion sitting in. So that process of chaperoning is a way of keeping the dialogue on a level of Dhamma, and is a way of, say, preventing things drifting into sort of personal and emotionally charged ways of making contact, even if it's just in conversation. So it's a way of living and arranging things that's very much for the protection of both parties, of all parties really. And it's interesting, since this time in the early 80s, what's developed in doctors' offices, in university campuses and so on, it's more and more the case that people who are in authority or people who have positions of power, they will say make sure that they're in a chaperoned situation, in various ways according to their own disciplines, for exactly the same purposes, so that there's a protection, there's a way that the situation is sustained in a skillful form, rather than being more, say, set up in a way that can easily drift towards a personal bonding. I remember in one of the, I don't know if it's still in there, but in the earlier edition of the Buddhist Monastic Code, when Ajahn Sumedho was talking about this, and why, even if there might be a completely innocent dialogue between a monk and a laywoman, or between a nun and a layman, or between a nun and a monk, that you wouldn't have a conversation like that in a secluded situation, where no one can listen in, or that it's in a private, secluded place. And he quotes from the standard from sort of the classical Roman world, where Caesar's wife doesn't just have to be pure; she has to be seen to be pure. So if you're it was Calpurnia was Julius Caesar's wife, so that you're not just having to maintain that standard internally, but you're also conscious of how things look and how they appear from the outside. And so even in the Buddha's time, this particular rule about having say proper chaperoning, or not being alone together, a monk and a woman in a secluded place, it was established because of an arahant, Venerable Anuruddha, who was blameless in his conduct, completely, with a mind, a heart completely free of greed, hatred, and delusion. But it was because of Anuruddha staying up through the night giving Dhamma teachings to a woman alone in a secluded place. If I remember the rule correctly, probably somebody can remember which Pachitya it is. So. No. Anyway, one of them. 40-something, I think. That Venerable Anuruddha, who was an arahant, it was because of him, even though his conduct was completely blameless, and it was a very innocent conversation, teaching Dhamma for a long time, but then it didn't look good. That the two of them secluded in a chamber inside a rooming house for many hours, and so the Buddha said, this shouldn't be done. You should establish your conduct such a way that you don't have a conversation together with for the monks, together with a woman in a secluded place, and similarly, the comparable rules for the nuns community, that they're not engaging in private conversations in a secluded place. It's a way of say establishing mindfulness, and also that the experience has shown that if you don't do that, if this rule is not followed, then it very easily gets into difficult situations. And on one or two occasions where just for Luang Por Sumedho, when the attendant monk had to step out of the room for a few minutes just to go and organize a cup of tea or something, then Luang Por Sumedho was accused of having said something or done something inappropriate while the other monk was out of the room, which he was completely innocent of, but the person took it upon themselves to make that kind of accusation, and without having another witness there, then it was just Luang Por Sumedho being accused of something, and he didn't have any other way of backing up his perspective on it. And so he was, I would underscore that, he was completely blameless. He didn't say anything or do anything. But this person in one or two situations that I know of, they made that kind of accusation for whatever reason. So that it's it is an important dynamic. It's not just something that is say lingering over from ancient times, but it's something that is very relevant. And as I was saying, it's interesting that now, like in the situation of like a university lecturer, university professors, psychologists, therapists, and in medical situations, often it's required that there's a chaperoning presence there in order to make sure things maintain are kept on a level of propriety. So to carry on, yeah. The Buddha didn't say that a monk cannot teach women. He said that a monk should establish a relationship in which teaching can be given. I found this very helpful in training the monks at Chithurst. There are no scandals or problems there. When women come, they know the conditions for instruction and accept them. Therefore, the teaching of the Dhamma can be given without emotional involvement and all kinds of gossip-related problems. Many bhikkhus in England, both Thai and Western, have lost their reputation due to their laxity with regard to women. When I came to England, I also thought it would be a problem. I felt that Western women were going to hate and resent the regulations, but they don't. When they understand them, they respect them very much. Our 4 nuns at Chithurst, so it was Ajahn Chandasiri being one of those. I guess this must have also been before Sister Chintamani took the precepts, if there was only 4 of you. Yeah? Oh. So, anyway, so Ajahn Chandasiri was one of those 4. Sister Rochana, Sister Sundara, Sister Chandasiri, and Sister Tanisra were the 4 foundational group. They were the members of the foundational group of the nuns community. Our 4 nuns at Chithurst are more meticulous than we are. Please take note. They are very careful about the Vinaya because they really want to observe it correctly. In our monastic community, there is no jealousy about women. The situation where jealousy arises are a traditional world problem. Men fighting over women is a natural condition too. This kind of training avoids those difficulties. Roger Wheeler makes the comment, you teach everyone equally, don't you? And Paul replies, yes. At Chithurst, the nuns are very much a part of the monastic community. They come to all the daily activities and have the same training. So any comments or questions on that? Anything, Ajahn Chandasiri, you'd like to add in on that? It's all 40 years ago, it's hard to remember the details of those days, but any questions, comments? Yes, there's a Tenerindo.
Ajahn Amaro, I was wondering about the rules you just mentioned about having a chaperone. How did you do in the early days with telephone, for instance? Like if you telephone, like when people make, or monks make, or nuns make calls to the opposite sex, was there issues around it or discussions? Or because now I picture more like, you have these called like Zoom calls or FaceTime calls, or they can be quite private, right, in some ways, and that's more, I guess, let's say, unquote, intimate. But I would say the issue must have arisen as well when people had calls made, no?
Have you heard of a landline?
What?
It's where your telephone was actually attached to the earth with a wire.
With a rotary phone.
A rotary phone. The modern ones, you had buttons you could push.
No, I was just wondering,
I'm
phones.
Serious.
I'm serious as well. Like the landline, like when you had to make a call in Chithurst days, was there extra rules around it, or anyone could, have a call with opposite sex?
the phone was in the office at Chithurst, and it wouldn't happen that often, as far as I'm aware. Because it was usually like a junior person was looking after the office duties in an anagarika or an anagarika. Where often the person looking after the offices because of the taking care of the petty cash and so on. And so often it wouldn't be a monk, let alone an ajahn, who was picking up the phone. If somebody called or sent a message saying, I would like to have a phone conversation with Ajahn Sumedho. In those days, the teacher really was only Luang Por Sumedho. He was the only ajahn. When you use the word ajahn, it only referred to one person. And he really didn't like the phone. So if somebody said, I have to talk to Ajahn Sumedho on the phone, they'd really have to work for it to get him to agree to go to the phone. And if it was a situation where it was a woman who wanted to talk with him, he might have a monk sitting together with him in the room. He couldn't hear what was being said at the other end, but it was very, very rare. It did happen from time to time, and that but if a conversation did occur that was sort of going in an unskillful direction, then the monk, or I'm not sure if it happened at all with you and the anagarikas in the early days, but I think you'd terminate the call very quickly. Or I remember one time there was actually she ended up joining the community, Sister Upala, when she was Beth Trigaskis. The telephone rang during the morning meeting, the breakfast time meeting, and I was a junior monk, so I went out and picked up the phone in the office. And she had this extremely proper, sort of posh English accent, and and we didn't realize the extent to which she had some mental difficulties. But she said, "Thank you so much for dedicating the chanting for me, and for your visit yesterday." I thought, visit? Who visited? Did the Ajahn go to see Beth yesterday? He said, "But I'm terribly sorry, but you seem to have left one of your anagarikas behind." So I'm not kidding. And so first of all, I was sort of listening carefully and taking notes. Okay, it's Beth Trigaskis, and then we left one of our anagarikas behind. I think. Well, I think if they're all here this morning, Beth, and we're pretty sure we haven't left anyone. Said, well, no, it's without a doubt you've left one of them behind. And so then I began to realize, this person really has got some psychological difficulties. And so then, I carried on with the phone call and said, well, I'll pass it on to the Ajahn and let him know. And but I can assure you that we haven't lost any anagarikas; they're all here. And so please rest assured that nothing is out of order. And I'll let the Ajahn know. And she was quite happy for Ajahn Sumedho to be informed. So in a situation like that, a phone call that's sort of unusual or a bit sort of strangely charged in various ways, then you would just relay that to a senior person and say, well, this conversation just happened, so we should be alert if this person calls or if they get in touch that there's some difficulties there or some challenges or things are a bit out of balance with respect to that person. Nowadays, it's a whole different kettle of fish, as they say, because you've got all these different ways that you can communicate. Cell phones are in abundance all around the planet, so you can have extremely private conversations very easily, and so it is a bit more of an issue. In Thailand, I don't know if Nokia is still predominant there, but they had an expression called Nokia death for monks. Like death by Nokia, and what would happen would be that a certain devoted layperson would give a monk a phone, so then she would have his phone number, and then there would be a development of a relationship, and often starting off in a very innocent way, but then being available and giving advice over and over and over, and then fairly soon, then the monk would find themselves leaving the monastery. So that it became an expression in Thailand, Nokia death by Nokia, or Nokia death. But I think they've moved on to Samsung and an iPhone by now. But it is an issue, and I think it's something to be very attentive to. So personally, I try to avoid giving Dhamma teachings over the phone if I can, and if something is set up with a laywoman, if she wants to talk, then I would try and set it up so that her partner is there as well, or it's arranging it to. Once in a while, I might actually have another monk at my end to sit in and be there if I thought I'm not sure what this person's motivation is, or whether this is going to be able to be sort of kept on a skillful level. But usually you just try to avoid having conversations in that way, because also once you've made a connection, then people have got your number and they can contact you again very, very easily. So that I think because when you make contact with people over the phone or through Skype or FaceTime or Zoom or whatever, then you set a precedent, and once you've done it once, then it's easy for it to be done again. And so that it is an area to be cautious in, I would say. Yeah, could you use the microphone, Ajahn?
Yeah, what we were always encouraged to do, what we used to do, was if it was a man trying to speak on Dhamma with us, we would refer them to one of the monks and just really encourage them to speak to a member of the male community rather than ourselves.
Yes.
And that felt like a good solution. And similarly, I assume that, and I would like to think that if there was a woman needing special counsel, that she could be referred to one of us.
Yeah, and that's the ideal. These austere people to somebody of their own gender, but sometimes they say, "But I want to talk to you."
I know. Often they're not so interested when you suggest that.
Yeah. She doesn't understand. It's got to be you, Ajahn.
Yes, that's right.
And so then you just have to tread cautiously, and because you want to be respectful of people's needs and wishes, and you don't want to be sort of making presumptions, but also like with the Vinaya rules, you don't set up a situation that then can easily become problematic. You arrange it so that there's a few hurdles that have to be climbed over before it would get into being anything unskillful or inappropriate. Okay. Yes, Anagarika Evgenia.
Slightly different topic. In the beginning, there was about playing piano and learning how to play piano, and then you can play freely, so it's kind of in your blood. But I'm curious, monastics who was in training for a long time, so that it became their nature, when they went back to lay life, was it like, how was it like? Probably they changed a lot, and then to live in daily situation, was there any problem for them to adapt if they had to go back for any reason with this completely different mindset, like completely different from other people around?
Yes, a good question. It depends very much on the individual. And for some people it's really been really tough. It took them quite a few years. It depends a bit on how long you've been in the monastery. I've never disrobed, so I can't speak from personal experience, but I've been around quite a number of ex-monastics, and for some, it was maybe like a 4 or 5 year transition period, really just before finding their feet. Someone who's been in the monastery for, say, 20 years or so, it's perhaps the majority of their adult life. So that then to being a layperson is tricky. It's also, you get these kind of funny incidents where one former monk was describing how waking up early in the morning in bed with his girlfriend, and then suddenly realizing, where's my Sangati? I think, wait a minute, I'm in bed with my partner. I don't need my Sangati, because we have a rule about not being separated from your robes. overnight. You've got to have your robes with you at dawn. And so there's this kind of reflex, a monastic reflex of like, where are my robes? And, oh, but right, okay, it's not a problem. So and or there's another former monk said that when he would get anxious, he would reach for his robe to kind of hitch his robe onto his shoulder, because that had become a kind of anxious reflex. When you're sort of not quite sure of a situation, not quite knowing what to do with your hands, you'd sort of reach for your robe and hoik your robe up. It's not the same for the sisters, because you have your robes in a different form, but for us as monks, when you got your jiwon on, it's rolled up over the shoulder, and there's always this sort of tendency for it to drop off. And so even as a layman for years, he would find himself reaching for the loofah gourd of his robe as a sort of anxious reflex. I haven't got my jiwon on. I'm in jeans and a t-shirt. But so those kind of reflexes carry on. But it is very individual. For some people, they will be in the robes for 5 or 10 years, and then step out of it, and then within a few weeks, they're just quite sort of comfortably settled into a whole different pattern. Others, like I say, they might be 4 or 5 years before they really find their feet in the lay world. So it's a very individual thing. And it also depends a bit on what the attitude has been to the monastic form and the training, and so that for some people going into lay life, that then they are able to maintain a very high standard of sila, and to carry on with their spiritual practice. Other people, when they leave, the form had really been holding them together quite a lot. So that as soon as they leave the monastery, they start drinking or get into all kinds of complicated relationships, and they had not used the form to develop a lot of internal sort of cohesion. Like they weren't able to develop a self-reliance. And that the form was very much something that was holding them together. So the monk who took Luang Por Sumedho to Wabapong originally, Tan Somai, he was often Luang Por has said how that was very much the case for him. Was that as a monk he was very, very strict and very proper, but once he left the monastery, then he developed a really serious drinking problem, and so Luang Por Cha was very compassionate and helped him out a lot, but the way that he'd held the monastic training was very much sort of kind of depended upon the rules to say help him to behave skillfully, and without the structure of the vinaya, then he didn't have a lot of internal strength. So it's very individual. And I'm not sort of revealing any secrets. I mean, that's something that's very well known about Tan Somai, and Luang Por has mentioned that in many teachings, and also how, in particular, Ajahn Chah said, it doesn't matter how much of a mess Somai makes of his life, he's the one who brought you here, so you should always be respectful towards him. Just like Venerable Sariputta would always bow to wherever Venerable Asaji was. I think at the end of the day, before he laid down to rest at night, because Venerable Asaji was the one who brought Sariputta to meet the Buddha. So that, as I remember the story, where Venerable Sariputta would reflect, now where is Venerable Asaji at the moment? And he would bow down in the direction of Venerable Asaji out of a sense of gratitude. Well, he was the one who brought me to the Master, so I always have that connection, that gratitude. And Luang Por Cha said the same thing. You should never forget Tan Somai. He's the one who brought you here. Doesn't matter how drunk he gets or how much of a mess of his life. It doesn't matter. You have that connection with him. You should always be available for him, and because you being here, that's the one absolutely good thing that he's done with his life, and no one can take that away. And so it's good for you to remember that and to remind him of that. And so that. So if somebody leaves and then their life gets really sort of tangled and messy, there is still that connection. And I feel that's also important, because people can get into states of great despair and feel really lost. But that connection that they have with the Sangha and the way that it impacted their life and what they contributed to the Sangha while they were in the community, that those things, it's good to recollect those, to not forget that, because that is can be a genuine support. That's something that is of genuine value. Okay, so go on to the last part. This is part 6 of the interview, and Roger Wheeler asks, do you feel that Westerners are more suited to the Satipatthana practice than to the study of philosophical analysis? To which Luang Por Sumedho responds, Satipatthana is the whole point of the Buddha's teaching. One need not spend much time reading about it. I certainly don't feel it's necessary to study it, although it's quite all right to do so. I've nothing against that. Some people feel inclined towards scholarship and approach the practice in that way. However, I can only speak from my own experience. I felt that just the basic training was enough, the Four Noble Truths and the Satipatthana practice. I needed the Vinaya discipline and the Satipatthana practice in order to know the Buddha's teaching through experience rather than through theory. Otherwise, it's like reading maps all the time without going anywhere. And Roger responds, in Tibet, however, the practice seems to develop quite differently. There was much memorization of root texts and commentaries and debating on them. Luang Por responds, not having been born or lived in Tibet, I cannot very well speak for a Tibetan, but they obviously must have their reasons for their ways. I can only speak from my own experience, but to this day, the idea of spending years just studying the Dhamma, I wouldn't do it. I just would not! Exclamation mark. To me, it's like reading cookbooks without preparing any meals. And that's a frequent aspect of the teaching, and Luang Por Chah would very, very regularly talk in this way, because the majority of people involved in Buddhist practice, the main, up until probably the early 60s, certainly for the lay community, would have been studying Buddhist texts, studying Pali language, and very few people meditating at all. So meditation for lay people in Thailand was almost unheard of until about the late 50s. After the sixth Sangha Council in Rangoon in 56, 57, and then various Thai monks who were there were introduced to the Mahasi Yekta, the lay meditation center that Mahasi Sayadaw had established in Rangoon, Yangon. And they were quite inspired by that. So then they started up various teaching situations in Bangkok, like in Wat Mahathat, Section 5 Wat Mahathat, which is where Luang Por Sumedho first learned meditation in Thailand. And other centers in Thailand for lay practice was started up. But even amongst the monastic community, the Sangha were generally discouraged from meditating and encouraged to learn Pali, learn Buddhist studies, and even today, the Buddhist education, I don't think it involves any kind of meditation practice. It's all to do with Pali language, Buddhist history, Buddhist texts, and so that your various stages of study, they don't require any kind of meditational experience. As far as I know, I can be corrected on that. But I'm pretty sure if you have the levels of study, you can do the whole thing without ever meditating at all, which seems strange for us, but that was the landscape of Buddhist practice. So what that meant was that people would be coming to Luang Por Chah very, very frequently, both monastics and lay people, and be surprised at the lack of emphasis on study in Wat Pah Pong and in Ajahn Chah's tradition. And so he many of his teachings, if you read his Dhamma talks or listen to those over and over again, he's talking about the limitation of academic study, and he'd use the similes are like saying it's like being a ladle in a soup pot. You're immersed in the soup, but the ladle can't taste the soup. It can't be nourished by the soup. Or like when he was in England and somebody had asked him a very erudite sort of intellectual question about Buddha Dhamma, and he politely responded that she was like somebody who kept chickens and then ignored the eggs but kept all the chicken dung, and that you're kind of missing the point of it. Is if you're looking at spending all this time looking after your chickens, you should collect the eggs rather than just collecting all the manure. So it was a very, very common theme, and so when I first went to Wat Nanachat, then the basic standard was that apart from the Vinaya books, you were discouraged from reading anything for the first 5 years of your monastic life. Just like you say, read your own mind. That's what you need to read. And so the library at Wat Nanachat was literally one small cupboard, maybe about twice the size of this table. That was the library at Wat Nanachat. And so, but that was because there was such an overemphasis on the academic side and an underdeveloped appreciation for meditation. So Luang Por Sumedho and other forest ajahns like Ajahn Mahabur, Ajahn Tate, Ajahn Fun and so forth, they discouraged the study side and emphasized the meditation side. In countries like Myanmar, Burma, there's much more of a natural balance, and so that alongside the study they would have a program and be a strong encouragement towards meditation. So there's not so much of an either-or model in that country, but in Thailand it became quite divided because with the Sangha reforms at the beginning of the 20th century, late 19th century, early 20th century, there was an active discouragement for the monastic community to engage in meditation. It was understood the only reason why you would meditate would be to develop magical powers or to perform black magic or to be doing divining rituals, to do astrology. And then it would probably make you crazy, and lay people shouldn't meditate. So when Venerable Ajahn Mun first started teaching in the early part of the 20th century, he really had to go against quite a lot of a current of negative feelings about meditation. So that still lingered on in Ajahn Chah's era in the early 60s and 70s, and so that the kind of ignoring or the putting aside of the academic side was quite conscious. When we came to the West, then and we still had that same principle. It's like don't read the books, just read your own mind, put the books aside. What started to become apparent was that in Thailand that kind of worked because people grew up with Buddhist mythology, with the stories of the Buddha's life, with the teachings were around, the words of the suttas and the essential teachings were around in everyday life, and in the pujas that people would have. In the West, we didn't have that. So you get these situations where someone would come along to Chithurst and ask a question about some aspect of the teaching, and then many of us would be hard stretched to come up with an answer. They say, so what are it's called the Eightfold Path. What are the 8 things of the Eightfold Path? And you go, right view, and then and if you got 6 out of the 8, you felt doing pretty well. So anyway, cut a long story short, it became apparent that whereas putting all the books aside made sense in a context of a Buddhist country like Thailand, or largely Buddhist culture and country like Thailand, but in the West it would be a bit more sensible to be somewhat more educated. So after a few years, and then when Amaravati opened, then Luang Por was quite supportive of the idea of having a library and developing the resources for spiritual study, because it was obvious it was a bit of a lack within the community. But it's never been anything that was made compulsory. But those who are inclined towards study or getting more familiar with the suttas as well as the Vinaya discipline, then people were encouraged in that. And then in 1986. We had Venerable Ananda Maitreya, who was this wonderful elder Sri Lankan monk, came and stayed with us, and so he started teaching us Pali. He tried to teach us Abhidhamma as well. Probably not. Yes. What do you remember what year? Because I left Chithurst in '83. You're not switched on, mate.
Fairly early on, because Chris Woodfine used to drive him, and he used to drive him to Chithurst. He would arrive about 8:30 in the evening, and we'd have a Pali class. Then we'd have another Pali class before breakfast. Then we'd have another Pali class after breakfast, and then he would go. He was determined to teach us Pali, and we did a lot actually. The nuns were much the best. I mean, we used to go every time. I remember some of the monks found it very, very tedious, very trying. So he would come every week, and we'd have 3 classes in a row with. And then, yes, he came a second time to Amaravati and tried to teach us, well, Pali. We was more interested in Pali than Abhidhamma.
Abhidhamma was it started off with a low attendance, and it went down virtually zero.
It was almost a disaster.
Yes. I think I was already, because I went to Harnham in the spring of '83, and so I don't remember any of those early morning Pali classes at Chithurst. But anyway, so he was aghast at how ignorant we were of Pali, and he would say, as it says in the Dhammapada, then he'd recite 4 or 5 verses in exquisitely perfect Pali, and then he'd start talking about it, and you realise. What was the theme? Could you translate that for us, Bhante? And so he was, as you said, very, very generous, and worked really hard to try and educate us. And then through the classes he did for us here, he put together this book called Easy Steps to Pali, I think. And that he would do the Pali classes with us, and then he'd stay up late into the night, up till midnight, writing up the classes and forming them into structured lessons. And then by the end of the Rains retreat, then he had the manuscript for that book was all put together. It was his 70th vasa as a bhikkhu. And he had more reigns than all the rest of the Sangha put together. His attendant was senior to Ajahn Sumedho. His upatak was like a Mahatera, Venerable Anandamurti. So anyway, he contributed very, very greatly to our knowledge, and so extremely appreciative of his efforts. And so but Abhidhamma was a dead loss, and I think it was also because in the way that our teachers, either like Ajahn Chah and Ajahn Sumedho, Ajahn Buddhadasa would frequently draw upon sutta teachings and incidents from the life of the Buddha. The Abhidhamma has never really informed the practice, meditation practice, very much in Thailand, apart from people who studied initially through the Burmese tradition. So you have a couple of meditation centers in Thailand that came through the line through Lady Sayadaw or Mahasi Sayadaw, and so then they would have more of an Abhidhamma connection. But the ones were sort of homegrown in Thailand. There was almost no reference to Abhidhamma teachings at all. And when Ajahn Buddhadasa was asked about this, I wasn't there, but I heard this recounted. It might have been Luang Por Sumedho who told the story. When someone asked Ajahn Buddhadasa why he never taught Abhidhamma, he said, Abhi. Abhi means much. Too much. that was the end of the subject. So anyway, to continue. So then Roger Wheeler comments, I mentioned to you about Lam Rim, a systematic outline of the Buddha's sutra teaching. It's a graduated series of meditations that is taught as a method for attaining liberation. By studying and integrating it into one's mind, habituating the teachings to one's thinking, investigating through critical analysis. Do you feel this approach can cut through mental distortions? Luang Por responds, I really cannot say. I just don't know about it. I've never tried it out. Then Roger goes on to say, I find the Lam Rim to be an excellent framework for the Satipatthana practice. Having taken a number of courses here during the past 6 months at IMS, I find it's possible to do the sitting and walking practice, but I wonder if there is a deep understanding of what one is doing and why one is doing it. A conceptual framework can give one a good basis for understanding what the practice is all about. The reflective meditations are also a good motivating force, helping one to understand the rarity and meaning of having taken a human form, its impermanent nature, and the sufferings of cyclic existence. So the comment that he makes here, I wonder if there is a deep understanding of what one is doing and why one is doing it. And he's sort of relating that particularly to the sutra teachings out of the Tibetan tradition. And also, one of the things that's significant about Tibetan Buddhism is that it's very, very rare to actually study the sutras. It's almost, in a strange way, like in Thailand it was considered sort of inappropriate or out of place to meditate. It's one of those weird things in the Tibetan Buddhist world. And I've had conversations with numbers of people in the Tibetan tradition about this. It's almost considered that you're inflated or conceited to think that you can study the sutras and understand them, where you should be studying the commentaries and the interpretations of the great masters like Aryadeva, Vasubandhu, or Ashwagosha, Lama Tsongkhapa, and so on and so forth. Like, how can you assume that you understand this better than Lama Tsongkhapa or better than Ashwagosha or Vasubandhu? How can you be so inflated to think that you can understand this on your own? And so it's extremely rare for people studying Tibetan Buddhism to go to the original sutras. And I was having a conversation about this with Wangmo Dixie, who's the daughter of Tartang Tulku. She helps to run one of his main centers in Berkeley, in California, but she also organizes these large Dhamma events in Bodh Gaya, recitation of the Tipitaka. And they're a Tibetan group, but they sponsor this recitation of the Pali Tipitaka by monastic representatives from about 12 or 15 different countries. And they're slowly working their way through the whole Tipitaka with these huge events that they sponsor for 3,000 or 4,000 people every year in Bodh Gaya. Kind of amazing. And so I was asking her, how come your dad and your organization, how come they put so much effort into sponsoring the Pali Tipitaka when they're out of a Tibetan tradition? And in that conversation, it came out that her father is also really ardent in the promotion of studying the original sutras in the Tibetan tradition. And he too says it's really crazy to have this wonderful collection of teachings, but hardly anybody reads them. They're always going to the commentaries and the sub-commentaries and the sub-sub-commentaries. And that, so he's been she said he's been doing this for more than 40 years, trying to encourage people who are studying Tibetan Buddhism to go to the original sutras and read them and learn from the original sources rather than just reading the interpretations. And so part of their promotion of Pali is also trying to make the Pali teachings available and bringing that into the center of attention to encourage that getting familiar with the original source material and using that as a spiritual guide. So I was encouraged by that. But in the Thai forest tradition, rather than just referring to the suttas and the Vinaya, and in terms of Roger's comment, I wonder if there's a deep understanding of what one's doing and why one is doing it. Most of that is coming through the oral instruction of the teacher or teachers in a particular monastery, that it's the kind of living experience of the practice and put into the local language or local expression or through someone that you can actually talk to, that's where the deeper understanding and the motivation for why one would practice is very much informed by the kind of presence and the impact or the role of an individual teacher. So that the Ajahn in a monastery, it's kind of their job to help make the teachings available and real and workable, effective for the people who gather there. And so that the suttas are there in the background, but the majority of the teaching is from that sort of direct oral transmission. And so that particularly in the Gelugpa tradition, there's very much more of an emphasis on the written teachings, and as he said, memorizing these the root texts and commentaries that they're expected to learn, and so that becomes your acharya, is the texts that you're memorizing, so that you should know what Vasubandhu and the Aryadeva and the array of great sort of masters of the past have said, because that's your acharya that you're referring to, and so I feel that is also something that he hadn't quite got a sense for, of how much a living presence that is in our tradition and in our way of practice. So then Luang Por responds, I agree. This type of study is very good. I cannot see why the two cannot go together. I cannot see myself just studying it without doing it. In Thailand, I've seen monks study and learn Pali for 40 years, not doing the actual practice, and then even disrobing. But that's their problem. The fact is that one does not need to know an awful lot. The teaching is so simple. That's why for many people, the practice is enough. Yet I also seriously doubt whether people understand the point of the walking and sitting practice. It's still rather spoon-feeding when people are dependent upon being told what to do and having everything arranged for them. When I read the suttas and the Abhidhamma now, I can understand them. I know what's being said. Before I practiced meditation, I read many of the texts, but just could not understand what they really meant. When one is practicing, one is actually taking the teachings of the Buddha and really looking at oneself. When one investigates the nature of suffering, one isn't taking someone else's definition, but is looking at the experience in oneself. The Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path and dependent origination all become very clear when one meditates upon them. I don't want to be quoted on any opinions because they are just that. I can only speak from my experience. Some people seem to be able to get great benefits from studying the Abhidhamma, but I have just no interest in the Abhidhamma as a subject that I would study. Then Roger says, in Tibet, the study of the Abhidhamma came last on the list. However, the process of debate, as a skillful means for sharpening the mind, two people confronting each other in a quick, concentrated exchange, is like taking a dull knife, the mind, and sharpening it so that it can then be used as a sword to cut through ignorance. Presumably, many Tibetans have attained realization through using philosophical analysis as a tool to prepare their minds for meditation. The Gelug tradition, however, is often ridiculed by the other three sects of Tibetan Buddhism for its heavy emphasis on study. For those who are capable of pursuing such a system of learning, it seems quite valuable. So that's very much a part of the Gelugpa tradition. They're known as the more academic, and also the most strict in terms of the Vinaya practice. They're also the most recent of the Tibetan traditions. So the oldest one is the Nyingma, which is the original Tibetan community in that country from the first transmission of the teaching in so the I think 5th, 6th, 7th century. And then Buddhism was suppressed for a number of centuries, and then the next two, the Sakya and the Kagyu traditions, came into Tibet from about the 10th or 11th century. They came in from the Spiti Valley in northern India into Tibet, and then 2 or 3 centuries later, in I think the 13th century, then Lama Tsongkhapa was the one who founded the Gelug tradition as a sort of reform movement, say to sort of sharpen things up, as he perceived that there was a certain degree of slackness or drift in the Tibetan practice of Buddhism. So the Gelugs particularly emphasize academic study and the learning of the scriptures, and so they have this process of debate where they sit face to face and kind of vigorously make philosophical points with each other. Probably many people have seen films of this. They have like a whole courtyard filled with the monks and nuns as well, that they engaging in these debating practices, and they have their rosary in their hand, and they kind of pointing their fingers at each other as they make their points. And that's one of the ways they have their academic exams is in debate. So you sort of sit down with your acharya, and they'll ask you questions that you then have to respond effectively to. So then Luang Por concludes by saying, in your life here at the Insight Meditation Society, you'll find your Tibetan tradition more meaningful and useful if you learn to use it and have more confidence in it. So don't be just blindly attached to the Satipatthana practice. You're already established in a tradition and trained in it. So when you've had enough of sitting and walking, ... seeming to say you can go back to your Tibetan practice as well. And that's the end of that interview. So any final questions, comments? Yes.
Yes, I was about that idea of studying or not studying as part of one's practice. I find it interesting how there are like different character types amongst practitioners some for whom the practice can be, or the study of the suttas can be absolutely essential, and without it, it would be a huge loss for the practice. And it's like the idea of saying, okay, for 5 years, don't read any suttas at all and just meditate, would seem like sort of starving the practice immensely from a really rich nutrient. How there are people like that, and then others for whom it's like not even, the suttas don't provide anything, it's just like hollow completely. And I don't know, I've wondered sometimes what it is. Is it the way in which one reads it, or is it the personality type? My sense is sometimes maybe it's the kind of intention one has behind the reading. Like if one is, for example, reading as an end in itself, because one is just trying to memorize as much as possible or know all the suttas and maybe know as many facts as possible, maybe then it becomes dull and kind of useless as well and doesn't really lead anywhere. But I think if one reads as really just as a means towards something else and combined with meditation as well, then it's quite different. But I wonder what you think about how sort of these different ways, how one reads the suttas and different people, how they relate to the suttas as well.
I think there's a number of different factors. I think mostly I'd say it's personality type. That just as you're describing, for some people it's not to have an intellectual framework is like not having oxygen. It's like you can't breathe. That's the conditioning of their mind and what they're used to, and it's almost physically unbearable to not have those kind of ideas and principles around to be nourished by. And the other end of the spectrum, then there's somebody who's like, words. Why all the words? What's that got to do with anything real? And just can't relate to that as being anything essential or important. Just as you were saying. So I think a lot of it's personality type, also the conditioning of what you found valuable in your life. Because you might feel that that everybody else around me is studying a lot, therefore I should. But then you put your mind onto it, and you read the same paragraph 5 times over, and just like nothing is going in. It's just there's no connection with it. It's like there's nothing helpful. But whereas sitting meditating or sweeping the paths in the forest, helping to wash the dishes, then this is the practice. This is alive. This is real. So one of the aspects of a sappurisa, a well-rounded person, is atanyuta, knowing your own personality, knowing your own character, and seeing the things that benefit you. So sometimes it can be helpful to sort of stretch yourself. Like, it's not you're not really at ease with it. It's not really what you're particularly good at. But if you put effort into it, then you can grow. It can be something beneficial. Other areas, it just doesn't work. It's a shoe that does not fit. And no matter how much you try and tweak it, the shoe does not fit. And so that getting to know, this isn't just me sort of stretching myself in a difficult area. This is just something that just doesn't work. And so I think part of getting to know your own character is getting to know where, yes, this is a really good fit, this is really easy and I benefit a lot. Yeah, this is not a good fit, but if I really work at it, there's some good that comes from it. And then this is not a good fit, and like this is just a lot of grief and disappointment, and this just doesn't work. And to get to know those different areas and to function accordingly, and to see where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, and then to work with that. So you're not fighting against your own character, but you're learning to work with it. And there's a huge variety of within a monastery, any community, even where you've got a small community like 5 or 6 people, you still have a big spectrum of different character types. We vary a lot from each other, and so that getting to know your own conditioning, and then also the conditioning of the people around you. That so atanyuta is part of it, knowing yourself, and then also parisanyuta, knowing the group that you're with. What are you participating in? What are the standards of the group? Pugalanyuta, knowing the personalities of other individual people. So that kind of being observant and taking into account how things work, that's a lot of the development of the practice. And that like Venerable Ananda Maitreya, he had great respect for Luang Por Sumedho and thought he was a wonderful monk, and was really, really impressed with the community he created. But he was sincerely amazed that we just didn't know Pali. And like, how could you just not feel deprived? It's like, he wasn't critical. It was just like, wow, because it was so much a part of his life. And he could converse in Pali. He could have a conversation in Pali. When Tongpalu Sayadaw came to visit Chithurst, Venerable Ananda Maitreya was there at the same time, and they were trying to just figure out who was the elder, who should bow to whom, and they spoke to each other in Pali. He was Burmese and he was Sri Lankan. They didn't have a common language, so their common language is Pali. And they worked out that Venerable Ananda Maitreya, his Upasampada was at Visakha Puja, and then Tongpalu Sayadaw was a few months earlier. So Ananda Maitreya bowed to him. Yeah, that was one of the great moments. Again, each one of them had far more years in the monastic life than the rest of the whole Chithurst community put together. But it was kind of an extraordinary moment. So he was just his effort to teach us Pali was very generous. But for some people, it's like, oh, great, this is really interesting, and took to it like a duck to water, and it was really there was an aptitude and an interest. Other people, it was just, they could just about get to the fourth line of the Anumodana without having to look at the book. It's just not going in, Ajahn. So that's. But I think it's important to recognize that people vary, and that just because somebody has an aptitude for intellectual life doesn't mean that they're any better or any worse. And that it's just a different inclination, a different disposition, and if it's used skillfully, it can be a benefit. If it's not used skillfully, it can be an obstacle. Yeah.
I think it also changes. I was totally uninterested in the suttas or any scriptures when I first came to the community. And Frida Wint wanted to teach us. She wanted to get us interested. And I just couldn't. But then some years later, after having practiced for a while, it was really exciting to see that this is exactly what the Buddha was saying. and gosh, he put it so well. Having been practicing for a number of years. So I think it can change.
It does, yes.
And, yeah.
I also remember Sister Rojana was similarly aghast at how Ajahn Sumedho would he never quotes the suttas. She would be quite upset that there was because she was from more of a sutta-based background, but yeah, she had great faith, so she stayed with it, as we know. But I remember her making a few comments like, "Why doesn't he ever quote the suttas? These Dhamma talks are all very well, but he should quote the suttas more often." But it does change a lot. So yeah, I noticed how if I look at Dhamma talks that I gave back in the early 90s, I hardly ever quote any suttas, and now I do a lot. And that's a lot because of living with Ajahn Pasno, because he was much more knowledgeable of the suttas than I was. So living with him, he would regularly be quoting suttas, or he'd say, "Well, look at this," or "Did you know that?" And I go, "Oh, wow." And so living with him, and collaborating with him, that changed the whole way that I related to it. So now I'm kind of surprised. I keep quoting suttas in these Dhamma talks. It's not a deliberate thing, but it just changes organically. And speaking of organic changes, it's now gone past 7 o'clock again, so we'll finish there.